Our question today is, why is Israel condemned so much? Why is Israel hated so much? So to give a comprehensive answer to that is not easy because it depends who's doing the hating. I'm not so sure if the reason, let's say, the far right hate Israel is the same as the reason an extreme leftist might hate Israel. That might not be the same reason as a Muslim or a Christian. So it depends who's doing the hating. But let me give you three basic ideas. Number one, at least on the part of a lot of Israel's neighbours, I think there is a lot of jealousy here. Israel is a state which is only about 67 years old. It is a bit of an upstart, and is at the centre of the Middle East. It's a tiny sliver of geographical area in the Middle East, surrounded by Muslim countries with massive populations and much, much larger area. And yet Israel is probably the most successful country in the area, economically, technologically, biotech, military, computer science, medicine, academic publications, tourism, etc. So now, if you come from a culture which was once a great culture, which was once the culture that was the most advanced culture in the world until sometime in the Middle Ages, then you look at the state of Israel and then you look at your own country, which exports oil and terrorism, the picture is not pleasant. And so consequently, there are those who hate Israel for that reason. Secondly, Israel's condemned a lot. I think part of that is a little bit of racism, a bit of reverse racism. What I mean is that, for example, Syria could massacre 30,000 civilians and very little is said. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Authority execute their own citizens with very minimum trial. They torture their own citizens. They send children out to do bombings and to fight troops, etc., using child soldiers. People don't say much. I guess it looks like people have lower expectations of them than they do of the Jews. The state of Israel is condemned because they, for anything, any minor violation, not saying that Israel is without guilt. Everyone does the wrong thing, except for me, obviously, but people do the wrong thing. However, the disproportionate response to Israel, I think, is a little bit racist because there seems to be a higher expectation of the Jews and of the state of Israel than there is of Libya and Palestinian Authority and Syria and Hamas and China and various other human rights abusers and occupiers, where basically nothing much is said in comparison. BDS targets only Israel, does not target all the other unbelievable human rights abusers around the world, and to some degree, I think that's a little bit of racism. It's racism which I am not completely uncomfortable with, because we do have a higher standard, because we have Judaism, which gives us and should give us higher moral standards, but it is, I think, a little bit of racism in that sense. Third, there is the idea that Israel is like a fossil. You know, the Jewish people, this like biblical nation, we've been around for over 3,000 years. We should have gone the way of the Etruscans. We should have gone the way of every other ancient empire, which is basically an archaeological site at this point. The Jewish people, however, are speaking Hebrew again, back in the biblical land of Israel, and that's disturbing. If your philosophy is that because the Jews rejected your Messiah or your prophet, therefore they're no longer the chosen people, then how do you explain the success of the state of Israel? How do you explain the return of the Jews to the land of Israel? How do you explain the revival of the Hebrew language? These are problematic. And even if you're an atheist, it's problematic, because here you see these people with all these biblical promises and this belief in chosenness and destiny and so on and so forth, and divine help, all of which you think is rubbish, and yet there seems to be evidence that it's working. So this is disturbing to people's worldviews. So with certain Catholics, it's disturbing. With certain Muslims, it is disturbing. With certain leftists, it's disturbing. Because the Jewish people almost like something out of Jurassic Park coming back to life, which is very frightening. And hence, you're frightened of something, you tend to hate it and condemn it. So those are three very simple reasons that, depending on who's doing the hating, Israel is hated and condemned. I think unjustly, but it's interesting also to look at what's going on in people's minds as to why they hate Israel and why they condemn it. Thank you very much for watching.